This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 443, entitled Sage Masculists Care More About Intelligence Than Looks When Judging a Woman's Sexual Marketplace Value, SMV. Description. This flyer explains why Sage Masculists care more about intelligence than looks when judging the sexual marketplace value, SMV, of a woman. Now the flyer itself. Sage Masculists care more about intelligence than looks when judging a woman's sexual marketplace value, SMV, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. When one listens to videos in the manosphere, one is struck by the emphasis they place on looks when judging a woman's SMV, that's sexual marketplace value. That is, how facially attractive she is to men, as well as other criteria such as slimness, curviness, niceness, sense of humour, etc. When I listen to these videos, I usually feel rather alienated, thinking that the criteria emphasised by these video creators are not my criteria. Sure, these usual criteria, such as for women a man's height, wealth, education level, power, health, strength, sense of humour, etc., and for men a woman's slimness, her curviness, her facial looks, her pleasantness, etc., are not unimportant to me, but I certainly emphasise things differently when it comes to judging a woman's SMV, which to me is really an inappropriate term. I'm judging more her general attractiveness, her compatibility, and I use different criteria compared to those usually trotted out in manosphere videos. This flyer is aimed at the minority of men in the manosphere who can describe themselves as sages. A sage is someone with a very high IQ, say in the top percentile, who is interested in ideas, who reads and thinks a lot, who is bored by people with average IQs, in brackets called here peakers, whose IQs place them in the peak of the IQ bell curve, aka average Joes or Janes, close brackets. To sages, peakers are dumb, ignorant and boring, so are to be avoided. Sages usually set up their lives so that they can avoid the presence of peakers by not having friends who are peakers, not participating in activities popular with peakers, brackets called peakery. For example, watching sports, going to peaked Hollywood movies, listening to pop music, etc. Close brackets. Sages are appalled at the fact that half the population doesn't even read one book a year. Since sages are much brighter than most people, they absorb ideas and concepts very quickly and are usually hungry to do so, since they enjoy the intellectual stimulus they get from learning about interesting concepts and facts. So over the years, they build up an enormous supply of knowledge. So not surprisingly, when they do talk with peakers, sages are struck at how ignorant and hence how boring peakers are, who know nothing in comparison. Thus sages and peakers don't mix, literally. They are like oil and water. Most sages isolate themselves from peakers and live a lifestyle peopled nearly exclusively by other sages, so as to avoid the frustrations generated by peakers with their greatly inferior minds, their suffocating ignorance, and their yawningly boring opinions and personalities. So what criteria do sages employ when e-dating, when seeking out a potential partner for romance and sex? Research shows that IQ compatibility is very important in a relationship, If there's an IQ difference within the couple that is greater than 5 IQ points, then the relationship usually fails. Thus, compatibility is very sensitive to IQ differences. It's a reality if one looks at the nature of the IQ bell curve, that is, the bell-shaped IQ score distribution curve, that most people are of average intelligence, in brackets IQ equals 100 in Western countries, and that only a small minority of people have a really high or really low IQ score. The more extreme the score, the smaller the proportion of people in the population who have that score. Another interesting bell curve fact is that women's bell curve is shifted down by 4 IQ points compared to men's. That is, that women are on average 4 IQ points dumber than men, as shown by recent research. This is not surprising given women's hypergamy, that is, the female instinct to mate up, to obtain the superior DNA of superior men for their kids, so that their kids have superior DNA than their mothers, which is obviously good for the species. Women sexually select men who are taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer, and smarter than women. So it's to be expected that men are taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer, and smarter than women. There's a correlation of 0.4, that is non-negligible, between brain volume and IQ. Women's brains are 10% smaller on average than men's brains, so the average IQ difference that exists between men and women is to be expected given women's smaller brains. This 10% smaller brain size in women is something that everyone should know about, because it utterly crushes any pretense of the feminists that women are men's equals, not when women have an ice cream scoop's lesser volume in their brains. That is, 10% less neuronal processing capacity. And no wonder women don't build anything, invent anything, create anything, and have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. Another interesting difference in women's and men's IQ bell curves is that women's is taller and thinner, and men's is shorter and fatter, a phenomenon labelled GMV, that is, greater male variance. That is, men's scores on just about anything measurable will be more spread out than women's. This is thought to be a result of the fact that men have only one X chromosome in their cells, whereas women have 2. The X chromosome is one of the biggest of the 23 chromosome pairs in each cell, and the Y chromosome is one of the smallest. So there are hundreds of genes on the X chromosome in the man cells that don't get matched with a pair gene on a second X chromosome, as happens in women's cells. There are many more recessive genes than dominant genes, so with men, a greater variety of genes get used over a whole population than with women, whose dominant genes suppress their recessive genes, given that women have 2 X chromosomes. Thus, for any dimorphic species, that is, where the male and female bodies have different shapes, there will be this phenomenon of GMV. Thus, at the very top end of the male IQ bell curve, there will be more men than women, since men's IQ variance is 10% higher than women's. So when it comes to e-dating for these super bright, intellectually elite males, what criteria do they use when trying to find a compatible female partner? Now, I'll start getting more personal, since I'm one of those elite males as a retired PhD'd full professor in pure math, physics and computing. What criteria did I use when I was e-dating? My top criterion was not good looks, as is used by most manosphere video content creators, but intelligence. This is the end of part 1.